Hi, I'm Anna. In this video, I'll share the heartbreaks and betrayals my family has experienced. You can listen while watching my cute cats. Don't forget to send the gift at the end of the video to your loved ones. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video, subscribe to my channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Ready? Let's begin. Anna, are you listening? You just need to sign the papers and we're done, my husband John said. We had been married for over 25 years. I tried to focus, but his voice seemed to fade as he went on. It all started this afternoon when I got home from the office. John was sitting at the dining table with a glass of whiskey and a stern look. He hadn't poured a second glass, not considering if I might want one too, especially given the turn our conversation was taking. I sensed trouble as I sat down. Without any small talk, John announced he was leaving me. He claimed to have met someone else. Someone who made him happier than I ever did, making me feel inadequate. As his volume increased, his words felt more and more distant. Our story was a typical one. We met in college, stayed together, and had our son, Jack, shortly after getting married. He wasn't the sole reason we married, but he was always part of the plan. Now, we both had stable careers, lived comfortably, and had paid off our mortgage with some savings to spare. We often expressed our love, took family trips, and even though our physical closeness had diminished over time, we still had moments of connection. I believed our love was deep and that we would grow old together. Until this afternoon, John's rant continued, his face reddening with each passing moment. "Anna, look at me," he demanded. It was increasingly hard to focus, but I turned toward him. "You need to sign these papers," he insisted, pointing at the documents before me. His tone was forceful, but I struggled to concentrate. It felt as if the room's light was dimming, even though the kitchen lights were on. Inside, I was a turmoil of emotions, but outwardly I was unresponsive. The longer I remained silent, the angrier John became. The last thing I remember is his slap. I couldn't feel the impact, but I imagined it left a red mark, yet I still couldn't move and the world seemed to darken around me. It had been a long day. The drive home from the office was delayed due to a traffic jam. When I finally arrived, the house was eerily quiet. The lights were on, my car was in the driveway, but John's was gone. Walking into the kitchen, I dropped my bag and books. My son Jack sat at the table, motionless, staring into space. An open bottle of John's whiskey and an almost empty glass were on the table. In front of Jack were papers with "Sign Here" tabs. I approached him and touched his shoulder. "Hey, Jack," I said, expecting a response, but he remained unresponsive. Walking around to face him, I was shocked. His eyes looked glazed, almost milky white, with tears staining his cheeks. He wasn't blinking, and a trail of drool hung from his mouth, about to drip onto his lap. Panicked, I called out, "Jack, Jack, come back to me." Tears welled up in my eyes. With no response from him, I tried to calm myself. "Slow down, Anna. Jack needs help," I whispered to myself. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I explained that my son Jack was unresponsive. After giving my details and address, they dispatched an ambulance, promising a 10-minute arrival. I sat beside him, holding his hand, trying to reassure him. This man had been my rock growing up. Despite his demanding job, he always made time for my school events. On my 16th birthday, he surprised me with a vintage guitar, not the best, but it was special because it came from him. Now, 5 years later, I was studying music at college, majoring in guitar, thanks to his unwavering support. As I waited, questions flooded my mind. Why was Jack like this? What had happened, and where was John? Glancing at the paperwork on the table, the words "petition for divorce" caught my eye. Shocked, I started reading. My skin crawled as I realized John wanted a divorce for reasons unknown to me. It seemed likely that Jack's condition stemmed from these papers, especially with John's open whiskey bottle suggesting he had given Jack the papers and left. People often talk about the roller coaster of emotions, but I doubt they felt such betrayal. For me, any desire to see John again vanished shortly after the ambulance arrived. I directed them, and after getting Jack onto a stretcher and off to the hospital, I locked up the house and followed behind in my car. Making calls as I drove, I contacted my grandmother, Jack's mom, his sister Karen, his best friend, and then his boss at work, informing them of Jack's situation and his upcoming absence. I explained that I found him unresponsive and that he was en route to the hospital. Everyone asked for updates on his condition, and his boss assured me he would arrange emergency leave and inform their higher-ups. I dreaded the next call, but I knew I had to call John. The phone rang a few times before he answered. "Hey Anna, sweetheart, how was your day?" His casual tone shocked me. Surely he couldn't be so naive to think I wouldn't know what was happening. It had been almost an hour since I found Jack, and he knew my routine. "Where are you, John?" I asked, my voice steady but filled with restrained anger. "I'm out and about, honey." He trailed off, sensing my urgency. "Why do you ask?" "So, you've just broken Jack's heart and left him without a second thought." "Oh no, darling," he replied, his voice attempting to sound soothing. I tried to explain everything about Jane and our situation, but Jack wasn't responsive. I thought it best to leave and let him process it. "We won't be living with him anymore." Her attempt to downplay the situation infuriated me. Given Jack's state, it seemed more likely that she had ripped his heart out and left him shattered. "It seems to me like you abandoned him when he needed you the most. Are you really that heartless? Or do you just not care?" "Sweetheart, don't get angry. I understand this is a shock, but your father will be fine. I'm only asking for what's rightfully mine and some support while Jane and I wait to marry." I nearly shouted. "You haven't seen angry yet, John. And just so you know, I'm following Jack to the hospital. He's in an ambulance." When I got home, he looked like he'd had a stroke. "Oh, Anna, my dear, I'm so sorry to hear that, but no excuses, John. Let me ask you, is this Jane you're running off with the same Jane from your office that you keep talking about?" She hesitated. "Yes, sweetheart, Jane from my office," she admitted. "So let me get this straight. She's a dozen years younger than you, and you've been having an affair with her for how long?" She hesitated again. 6 months. "Right. So for the last 6 months, you've been involved with someone from your office behind Jack's back. You've been lying to Jack and me, hiding your affair. I had no idea you were capable of such deceit, and clearly, neither did Jack, judging by the state you left him in. How did you expect either of us to react?" "Well, I suppose not positively at first, but once we're living with Jane, you'll see we're meant to be together." "We," I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You expect me to leave Jack and move in with you and your boyfriend? You've got to be kidding me. Anna, I am your mother, and I will not be spoken to like that, regardless of how upset you are." "Then I guess we're done talking," I said, hanging up before she could respond. If she thought I would support what she was doing, she was sorely mistaken. She tried calling me back multiple times, then started calling Jack's phone, which I had with me. I ignored her calls. By the time I reached the hospital, the ambulance crew had admitted Jack, and he was under observation. Aunt Karen had arrived and told me that she had also received several calls from John but wasn't sure what was happening other than her brother being in the hospital. When I explained the situation, Aunt Karen's face turned a deep shade of crimson, almost as if steam were coming out of her ears. "Anna, do you have the documents that woman left for my brother?" she asked, her voice trembling with anger. "Here you go, Aunt Karen," I said, passing her the documents. Aside from being my aunt, Karen was our family's legal expert. We sat beside Jack for the next hour as Karen meticulously examined the papers, occasionally muttering in frustration. Doctors and nurses came and went, checking on Jack's condition. The bad news is your mother is set on this divorce. The timeline here shows the process has been going on for over 2 months and had to be served this week to avoid substantially higher fees from her legal team, Karen explained. I shrugged, feeling a mix of anger and resignation. I'd heard enough from John. I was determined to see that she and Jack separated after what she had done. It was strange. I had always looked up to my mom, but now her actions seemed entirely self-serving. This whole debacle seemed orchestrated by her new boyfriend Greg. Regardless, John and Jack weren't going to weather the storm, especially if Jack's current state was any indication. The good news is she hired a mediocre attorney. She's going to have to spend a lot on this divorce, and even more if it goes to court, Karen smirked. Meanwhile, my dear brother has the best legal representation in town, and he's getting the family discount. We shared a small, bittersweet smile. Additionally, some of the demands here, like claiming 50% equity in the house and 60% of the financial assets, along with spousal and child support, are quite inflated. I assume you're not planning to live with your mother? I shook my head firmly. Good. Okay, I have some initial strategies, but we need to see how your dad's condition evolves over the next 24 hours. Your mother could already be in trouble for abandonment and mental cruelty. The following days were a whirlwind, with doctors constantly checking on Jack. Physically, he was stable, but he remained unresponsive. I managed to keep up with my university studies in the hospital room, laptop and textbooks spread out. Occasionally, a family member would relieve me, allowing me to go home, catch a few hours of sleep, and return. I'll admit I shed a few tears alone in the house. One of the most surprising moments during Jack's hospital stay was when Julia Anderson, the CEO of the company where Jack worked, paid him a visit. While I knew Jack's manager, Sam, I had never met Julia herself. Julia was an impressive woman with a calm yet commanding presence, olive skin, dark wavy hair, and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through you. As it turned out, Jack had been part of a support group at his workplace that had helped Julia during her tumultuous divorce a few years back. Her unfaithful ex-husband had tried to claim a significant portion of their savings and nearly succeeded in taking half of her business. Jack had introduced her to Aunt Karen, who had successfully protected Julia's assets, ensuring she didn't lose any business shares and securing child support for her then-year-old son. Julia visited Jack several times, expressing shock when I briefed her on the general summary of why he was hospitalized. She brought cards from everyone at Jack's workplace and spent time holding his hand, sharing stories from the office. It turned out Jack had a talent for humor in the workplace, and his absence was deeply felt by his colleagues. I should mention that Jack is a financial analyst working for one of the consulting firms that assist corporations in managing their financial operations. While the work may be tedious, Jack apparently brightened up the workday for everyone with his humor and presence. About 2 weeks later, I returned from a shower and a nap at home to find Karen and Julia in the midst of a conversation, which seemed a bit heated. Their frustration was directed at my mother. It turned out my mother had sent a demand letter to Julia requesting access to all of Jack's bonuses from the past few years. It didn't matter that the bonuses had already been paid out. The letter demanded that she receive 50% of them within 30 days into a designated bank account, or she would pursue legal action against Julia. Besides the absurdity of her claim for money already dispersed, it seemed like she and her new partner were in dire financial straits since I've frozen all the joint assets while Jack is incapacitated, Karen remarked with a triumphant grin. I chuckled, making my presence known. Yes, this morning I received my first communication from Mom in 2 weeks, a text message asking if I could lend her a few thousand. I haven't responded because I'm still pretty upset with her. She hasn't even asked about Jack since I told her what she did to him. Over the past couple of weeks, Julia had become fiercely protective of my dad. Whenever my mother was brought up, Julia's eyes flared with anger, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. It felt like sparks were about to fly from her intense gaze. I just prayed she never had to face my mother, otherwise, I feared an explosive confrontation. Despite everything, she was still my mom. Anna, she is completely devastated. The most wonderful man. If it weren't for your father, I wouldn't have my son Ethan or my company. So many at the office supported me during my darkest days, but your father truly listened. He never judged my ex-husband or me, he just let me speak. No one else ever did that without trying to give advice. He introduced me to your aunt and made sure I was taken care of. If he had been single, I would have pursued him with everything I had. I shrugged, a wry smile forming. He won't be married much longer. Their faces lit up with realization, and Aunt Karen giggled while Julia smiled. Thanks, Anna, I needed that. I still can't fathom what your mother has done to him or how she could discard such an amazing man. I need to head back to the office, but before I do, Julia walked over to my dad, and as Karen and I watched, she bent down and gave him a gentle but sincere kiss on the lips. She looked up at us and smiled, but her smile quickly turned into shock when my dad emitted a groan. As I slowly came to, I felt soft lips on mine, conveying a tenderness I hadn't experienced in ages. The beeping of hospital machines and my groans reminded me of my surroundings. Expecting to see John, I opened my eyes, surprised to find Julia smiling down at me. Anna and Karen approached from the other side of the bed. It's okay, Dad. You're going to be okay, Anna reassured me. As my memories returned, I realized John was leaving me, or had already left. Over the next few minutes, the three of them filled me in on how Anna had found me unresponsive, called an ambulance, and discovered the divorce papers, exposing John's month-long affair. I learned that John had threatened Julia when Karen froze our finances until they could assess my condition. How long? I asked. 2 weeks, Jack. Karen replied. I turned to Julia. You kissed me. Julia blushed. Yeah, sorry. I was about to head back to the office and was saying goodbye. I smiled. No, it's okay. I guess I'm single now, so I think it's okay. Over the next few hours, various doctors came through, conducting checkups, blood tests, and more. Julia canceled her office visit and stayed along with Karen and Anna. Among the doctors was a psychologist. As he delved into my experiences, I recounted finding John alone, drinking, and his announcement of leaving me. I described how the world seemed to lose its color and everything became disjointed, making it difficult to move. Despite growing upset, my last memory was of John slapping me and yelling, her words a blur. The girls collectively gasped at the revelation of John's aggression while I was unresponsive. Dad, what time do you think it was when you became unresponsive? Anna asked. I'd say around 5 or 5:30, honey. Why? Because it was past 7:30 when I got home and found you, and there was no red mark on your cheek. So, I assume Mom must have left you there alone for quite some time. The psychologist interjected, it's not uncommon for someone in your situation to experience a shock-induced state. In your case, I'd say you went into shock upon hearing your wife's declaration of leaving you. This is an extreme case, but it does make sense. Karen added, when Jack was young, there was a bully a few years older than him who teased him relentlessly. One day, a neighbor found Jack lying on the ground in the park. Our parents put him to bed, and he woke up the next morning. It wasn't overthought since he woke up regularly the next day, but it did happen. I remember Billy pushing me around and teasing me. After a while, I didn't know what happened, but when I woke up, Mom and Dad told me I had passed out and someone brought me home. When I told them about Billy, they talked to his parents. The next day, Billy came up to me at school and apologized. I chuckled at the memory. I don't think he was sincere, but he never bothered me again after that day. I believe we may have a precedent here, the psychologist noted. In many ways, your current experience mirrors that childhood incident. The brain remains a complex mystery, the neurologist said. However, if you've experienced something like this before, it's plausible it could happen again. I frowned, but he reassured me. I wouldn't worry too much. With the love and support of these amazing people, even if something were to happen again, I believe you'll be in good hands. We spoke for a few more minutes before he excused himself. Despite having been in a coma for the past 2 weeks, I felt an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. I sent all 3 women home to rest, assuring them they could check on me tomorrow. Over the next couple of days, I began to readjust to life outside the hospital. Julia brought me a work laptop and a few light tasks to keep me occupied if I felt up to it. Karen visited mainly to go over the updated divorce documents and have me sign papers to move forward with ending my marriage to John. She also brought along a young detective, Jessica Hill. Detective Hill spent about an hour interviewing me about my experience that night with John. She thanked me and informed Karen and me that her report would be ready in a few days. I wasn't sure if we planned to file a complaint against John, but Karen told me to leave everything to her, kissed me on the forehead, and left on the second afternoon after what Anna called my checkout. I was discharged and able to go home. Anna accompanied me, and I was pleasantly surprised to find Julia waiting at the door. She helped Anna guide me to her spacious SUV. Julia stayed for dinner that night. We ordered takeout, and she helped clean up before staying to watch TV with us for a couple of hours. When she left, Anna hugged her, and I made sure to walk her to her car. Julia, thank you so much for everything you've done these past few weeks. I don't know how I can repay you. Well, in a few weeks when you're feeling better, you can take me out for dinner and dancing. I blushed. Just a day out of the hospital, and the woman whose kiss had brought me back to life was asking me out. But she was beautiful, and according to John, I was to be a single man again. Okay, next Friday night after work. That gives me almost 2 weeks to get back to normal. She nodded and gave me a warm hug. It lingered a bit longer, and I sensed a deeper meaning. As she got into her car, for a moment, I found it amusing that I couldn't even remember the name of the woman I had been married to for almost 25 years. For the next few days, Anna, Karen, and Julia hovered around me, making sure I was all right. It was comforting to be cared for in such a way. However, the news Karen brought that Friday afternoon caught all of us off guard. This afternoon, John got arrested, she announced. What happened? I asked. Well, after your statement to the police at the hospital, they issued an arrest warrant for John on grounds of mental cruelty to a person with a disability. This is because you were mentally incapacitated and unable to defend yourself at the time. Also, she left you unattended for an unspecified period, which adds to her troubles, Karen explained. What does this mean for the divorce? Julia, who had joined us for dinner, asked. Her 8-year-old daughter, Emma, was watching a Disney movie in the living room while we talked. First, with Monday marking my return to work, Julia would see me then. However, I was starting to understand that she was seeking more than just an efficient number cruncher in the office. I found myself not objecting to the idea of Julia and imagining what lay beneath those nicely fitting clothes she wore whenever she visited. I thought. Karen grinned. It's likely going to tilt a few things in Jack's favor. I'm advocating for a 50-50 split of the bank accounts and the house. We could aim for more given the circumstances, but I reckon Jack would want to be fair. I nodded. John won't be able to touch any of the bonus money he tried to extract from you, Julia. I filed a case against him for extortion alongside the mental cruelty charge. It won't do much except prevent him from accessing what isn't rightfully hers. He'll probably be out in a couple of days, none the worse for wear, and likely back with her wretched soulmate. What I aim to do is expedite the divorce using Jack's hospitalization and recovery as a pretext. Then, depending on her reaction, I have plans in motion. I'll ensure Jack doesn't lose anything he shouldn't, Karen said, smiling. So how long will the divorce take, Aunt Karen? Anna asked. Assuming everything goes smoothly, it should take around 3 months. If John decides to contest anything, I'll bring in reinforcements, which will prolong the process but inflict more damage on her, Karen explained. That evening, as I escorted Julia to her car, Anna helped Emma into the back seat of the SUV. Julia embraced me again and surprised me with a quick kiss reminiscent of the other day. Jack, I know you're married and a man of honor, so I won't rush things, but I want to lay claim to you now and let you know that I desire you. I wanted you for a long time, but I'd never pursue a married man or disrespect someone's marital vows. I've experienced that myself, and I wouldn't want to inflict that on someone else, even if their marriage is in trouble. Julia expressed sincerely. For a moment, I was taken aback, but then I realized just how much my life had changed in such a short period. I stared into her deep brown eyes, brushing a loose strand of her dark hair away from her face before leaning in for a kiss. What began as a gentle kiss quickly turned into one filled with passion, lasting about 30 seconds. The connection between us was undeniable. When I pulled back, Julia's eyes were closed, and she ran her tongue over her lips, savoring our kiss. I grinned and said, "Consider that my acceptance of your claim." We glanced over at the girls. Both were giggling at our display of affection. Emma was clapping, and Anna wore a huge grin. As Julia and Emma drove off, Anna hugged me, and we waved goodbye. The next few months were a whirlwind. On one hand, John was eager for a quick divorce, but on the other, he wasn't happy with the settlement terms. It seemed her new boyfriend, Greg, was behind this, convincing her she deserved the majority of the assets. He was feeding her lies, and deep down, she must have known it. After so many years of marriage, her demands became increasingly ridiculous. Karen had one stern conversation with John's lawyer, and whatever was said ended all objections overnight. Julia and I went on dates every Friday night while Anna started babysitting Emma, picking her up from school. We took the afternoon off work and prepared lamb chops with a burnt butter sauce for the three of us. It was a favorite meal, and I hoped it would ease any potential awkwardness during our conversation. Anna arrived home around 5:30, went to shower and change, and just before 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang, signaling John's arrival. I haven't described John's appearance in some time, but perhaps I should now, with a before and after perspective. Before everything unfolded a few months ago, John was an attractive mid-40s man with shoulder-length brown hair and a curvy figure. He carried a few extra pounds but was still quite appealing with a well-proportioned bust and an attractive shape. Unfortunately, the man standing before me now was almost unrecognizable. John had gained a significant amount of weight, developing jowls under his chin and puffy cheeks. His stomach, which had previously had a slight mom belly, now sagged over her pants, and his once curvy figure had expanded. He wore loose-fitting clothes that concealed even more. I have nothing against people of larger size, but this wasn't the John the first knew. My surprise at his physical transformation was evident on my face, although John made no comment, merely grimacing in response. Hello, John. Please come in, I greeted him. As we entered the kitchen, I offered him a glass of wine, which he accepted. We engaged in small talk for a few minutes. He asked about work and my well-being while I avoided asking about his health. It's what Greg wants. He didn't like how thin I was, so he's been working on bulking me up, he said, addressing the unspoken question that I frowned. For over 25 years, I had cherished this man. Despite his actions, a lingering concern for his health remained, albeit greatly diminished. You don't approve, do you? He asked, looking at me. No, John, I don't. When we were together, you were a healthy size. I'm taken aback by your appearance. You don't seem well, and if I weren't so hurt by what you did, I'd be more concerned about your health and try to help, I expressed. But you don't care, do you? His expression fell. You and Anna, you're happy and healthy without me here. Well, there's a part of me that cares, but when you walked out and practically left me for dead, I trailed off, shrugging while he sighed. I deserve that. I did a terrible thing, he admitted. Our conversation grew more intense as the evening progressed. Anna joined us, and the atmosphere was thick with unspoken words and unresolved feelings. The dinner I had prepared was meant to be a gesture of goodwill, but it felt like a peace offering at a battlefield truce. Look, John, I began. We're here to discuss the final terms. I want to ensure Anna's well-being and make sure we both move on in the best way possible. I understand, Jack, John replied, his eyes downcast. I want what's best for Anna too. Greg's been pushing me to ask for more, but honestly, I'm tired of the fighting. I just want this to be over. Karen had advised me to remain firm but fair. Let's agree on a fair split of our assets, the house, the savings, everything. I want to make sure Anna's future is secure. John nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. I agree. I'm sorry for everything, Jack. Truly. The next morning, Karen and I finalized the paperwork, ensuring that the terms were fair and just. The relief I felt was immense. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted off my shoulders. As the day of the final decree approached, Julia was my constant support. Our relationship had grown stronger, and I looked forward to a future with her. On the evening of the final decree, Julia and I went out for a special dinner. We talked, laughed, and celebrated the end of a painful chapter in my life. 3 days later, as the final decree came through, I felt a sense of closure. Anna, Julia, and I had dinner together, toasting to new beginnings. Julia looked at me with her deep brown eyes, a promise of a future filled with love and happiness. To new beginnings, Julia said, raising her glass. To new beginnings, Anna and I echoed, clinking our glasses together. Life had taken unexpected turns, but I was grateful for the love and support around me. As we sat together that evening, I knew that despite the challenges, the future looked bright. No, Mother, Anna interjected, appearing fresh from the shower. You did a terrible thing. You single-handedly tore apart a happy family and then walked out without a care in the world. I can't understand why Dad even agreed to let you come here tonight. Anna, calm down. I intervened. Your mother knows how difficult this situation is for all of us. She requested this meeting, and I thought the least we could do is be mature and hear her out. Anna wasn't pleased. Like me, she hadn't spoken to her mother since that fateful day. The way she was glaring at her mother, it was clear this situation wouldn't end well if left unchecked. It was time to steer the conversation elsewhere. In a cheerful tone, I suggested, tough discussions aren't ideal right before dinner. Let's eat first. I served dinner, and though no one spoke, there were numerous glances exchanged across the table. Anna maintained a steady glare at her mother throughout the meal. After dinner, I cleared the table, and John requested to speak to Anna alone. No way. You can say whatever you want to me with Dad here, Anna retorted firmly. I felt torn, but it was clear Anna was resolute about not being left alone with her mother. John seemed to sense that too. The look in her eyes mirrored the same look he had given me on that fateful night. He acquiesced, John took a deep breath, hesitant to discuss matters in front of me, but addressed Anna nonetheless. Anna, I wanted to ask for your forgiveness for what happened that night. I didn't handle things properly, and despite everything, I don't want to lose my daughter forever. Glancing at me, he added, there's more, but I'd prefer to discuss it in private without your father present. Sorry, Mom, but if you can't say it to both of us, then I don't want to hear it, Anna declared. Before John could respond, Anna stood up and left the room, slamming her bedroom door shut. I hoped that would go better, John murmured softly, more to himself than to me. Considering the circumstances, it went rather smoothly, I replied. John, you need to realize that right now, nobody in this house holds much affection for you. She started to reply, but I raised my hand to stop her. Let me finish first. You engaged in a long-term affair and kept it a secret from both Anna and me. Then you served me with divorce papers out of the blue. When I went into what Anna refers to as checkout mode, you proceeded to yell, scream, and slap me. John appeared stunned, like a deer caught in headlights. Yes, I remember that, I continued. And I recall most of that time until shortly after you first slapped me. But let's continue. At some point, you abandoned me when I was unresponsive, leaving me there until Anna arrived home and found me in the same state. Her expression turned to panic. When Anna called, John, you don't need to explain, I interrupted. You need to understand that your actions have consequences. That evening's dinner was delightful. Surrounded by people who cared for me, I realized that while one chapter had closed, another had just begun, and this new chapter was filled with promise and happiness. Julia and I enjoyed our dinner, laughing and talking about our plans for the future. Anna joined in, her earlier anger toward her mother gradually fading as she saw how happy I was. It was clear that Julia and I were building something special, and Anna's support meant the world to me. As the evening progressed, Julia's daughter Emma played with Anna, their laughter echoing through the house. It felt like a fresh start, a new family dynamic that was warm and supportive. Later that night, after everyone had left, Julia stayed behind to help me clean up. As we worked side by side, the connection between us grew stronger. When we finally finished, Julia turned to me, her eyes filled with love. Jack, I know this has been a tough journey, but I want you to know that I'm here for you always, she said softly. I pulled her into my arms, kissing her gently. Thank you, Julia. You've brought so much joy back into my life. I can't wait to see what the future holds for us. The next few weeks flew by, filled with new experiences and deeper connections. Julia and I continued to see each other regularly, and our bond grew stronger with each passing day. Anna and Emma became fast friends, often spending time together after school and on weekends. Eventually, the day came when Julia and I decided to take our relationship to the next level. We planned a weekend getaway to a cozy cabin in the mountains, a chance to escape the hustle and bustle of everyday life and focus solely on each other. As we sat by the fireplace, wrapped in each other's arms, I realized just how far I had come. The pain and betrayal of the past were behind me, replaced by a love that was genuine and pure. Julia, I love you, I whispered, looking into her eyes. I love you too, Jack, she replied, her voice filled with emotion. In that moment, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Our love was strong, and it would carry us through anything. Months later, Julia and I decided to move in together. It was a big step, but one we were both ready for. We found a beautiful house that was perfect for our blended family, and the move brought us even closer. Anna and Emma adjusted well to the new living arrangement, and our home was filled with laughter and love. The scars of the past had healed, and we were all looking forward to a bright and happy future. One evening, as we all sat down to dinner, I looked around the table at my new family. Julia, Anna, and Emma were laughing and talking, and I felt a deep sense of contentment. Life had taken me on an unexpected journey, but it had led me to a place of true happiness. Surrounded by the people I loved, I knew that this was only the beginning of a wonderful new chapter. To new beginnings, I said, raising my glass. To new beginnings, they all echoed, clinking their glasses together. As we celebrated our new life together, I felt grateful for every moment that had brought me here. The future was bright, and I couldn't wait to see where it would take us. With Anna, Karen, Julia, and Emma all joining in to celebrate my newfound freedom from John, we had a joyful evening. Later that Friday night, after the girls were in bed, Julia and I consummated our relationship. Whatever I did must have been right, because throughout the weekend, Julia seemed a bit sore whenever she sat down, but her eyes burned with a fiery passion that I knew was reserved for me alone. 6 months later, we tied the knot in a beautiful ceremony by a local lake, with many of our colleagues in attendance. Though we initially planned to marry later, we decided to move the date up to coincide with the arrival of Anna and Emma's new little brother. 5 years had passed, and Anna, her boyfriend, Julia, and I were enjoying dinner at a local restaurant when 5-year-old Keegan posed a question. "Daddy, who is that lady who keeps staring at us?" Turning to look, we spotted John sitting across the room. He had noticeably lost weight and appeared discontent. Since the divorce, we hadn't seen or heard from him, and he hadn't attempted to contact Anna. Excusing myself from the table, I approached him. "Hi, John." "Hi, Jack," he replied, glancing down at his chicken salad. "How are you?" I inquired gently. "You were right, Jack," he admitted, his voice trembling. "You were right about him. Greg convinced me I was his soulmate and that you meant nothing to him. When I received the money, he persuaded me to gain weight because he loved me that way. After receiving the divorce settlement, you advised me not to give it to him, but I didn't listen. He squandered it in 6 months and then abandoned me." Though I was still upset with her, her story lacked the happy ending mine had. Since then, I've spent every moment trying to rebuild the confidence he shattered and reclaim some semblance of my former self, she confessed, holding back tears. For the first time in years, I saw a glimpse of the John the First once knew. "Jack, I am so sorry. I treated you horribly because I believed Greg knew things you didn't. I abandoned the man who truly loved me, leaving you unresponsive. You could have died because of my actions. I know you can never forgive me, but I want to apologize." Tears streamed down her face as she spoke. Surprisingly, Anna had joined us, standing beside me, witnessing her mother's apology. She gave me a weary smile, grabbed my hand, and extended her hand to her mother. Seeing Anna's gesture, John panicked, attempting to leave, but Anna blocked her path. "Mom, stop. You don't need to leave," Anna asserted, sliding into the booth next to John. Anna and I joined her. I glanced at Julia, who nodded in agreement. For the next hour, mother and daughter conversed. There were many tears shed, but for once, they were healing, not hurtful. Once they caught up, Anna and I reintroduced John to everyone else. John seemed a bit unsettled when introduced to Keegan as Auntie John. Following that day, we gradually welcomed John back into our lives. Anna and her mother reconnected slowly, meeting for coffee every week or two. Trust developed gradually between them but eventually solidified when Anna got married. John had the opportunity to play the role of mother of the bride. Julia occasionally invited John over for dinner at our house. Initially, I suspected it was to show John what he had lost and what Julia had gained by marrying me. However, while they never became close friends, Julia and John developed an odd sort of friendship that I never quite understood. Karen never forgave John for the injury he inflicted on me, although she remained polite when they encountered each other. With Julia's approval, John and I engaged in some post-marriage counseling. We addressed many of the issues from our past spanning over 5 years ago. The counselors speculated that John might have been experiencing hormonal imbalances, but John vehemently rejected this notion. No, I threw away the most precious things in my life that day. I had a loving husband and a daughter who wanted to be with me. No hormonal imbalance can justify how I destroyed everything good in my life for someone who was nothing but trouble in bed and had an inadequate personality, she remarked with a bittersweet smile directed at me. Jack and Anna deserved better from me, she admitted tearfully, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. It took me 5 years to reconnect with them. I thank God every day that Jack has allowed me back into his life, and Julia too. She blushed, acknowledging Julia's warmth towards her. Despite everything, she had every reason to hate me, yet she has always treated me kindly. I got lucky, losing everything I discarded, and I will bear that burden for a long time. John gained more from those counseling sessions. As Julia and I lay in each other's arms, I couldn't help but reflect on how far we had come. The pain of the past had faded, replaced by a deep, enduring love. The next morning, we woke up to the sound of laughter and the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen. Anna and John were already up, preparing breakfast. Julia and I joined them, feeling the warmth and harmony that had become a constant in our lives. Over the next few years, our family continued to grow and thrive. Anna married her boyfriend, and they welcomed a beautiful baby girl into the world. Watching Anna become a mother was one of the greatest joys of my life. She had grown into a strong, compassionate woman, and I was incredibly proud of her. John too found happiness after reconnecting with us. He started volunteering at a local charity, helping others who had gone through similar struggles. It gave him a sense of purpose and helped him rebuild his self-esteem. Eventually, he met Fred, a kind and supportive man who appreciated him for who he was. They started a new chapter together, and it was heartening to see John finally find peace and love. Julia and I continued to nurture our relationship, finding joy in the everyday moments and cherishing our time together. We traveled, explored new places, and created countless memories. Our love only grew stronger with each passing year. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Julia turned to me and said, "Jack, I feel so blessed to have you in my life. Thank you for loving me and for being the wonderful man that you are." I took her hand in mine and replied, "Julia, you have brought so much happiness into my life. I am grateful for every moment we share, and I look forward to many, many more years together." As the sun dipped below the horizon, I knew that our journey was far from over. There would be challenges, but with Julia by my side and the love of our family, I was ready to face whatever came our way. The end of one chapter had led to the beginning of another, and I was excited for the future. Surrounded by love, supported by family, and anchored by the enduring bond once shared with Julia, I felt a profound sense of contentment. Life had taught me that even in the face of adversity, love and resilience could lead to new beginnings. And as I held Julia close, I knew that our story was just beginning, filled with endless possibilities and a love that would last a lifetime. One evening, 5 years after reconnecting with John, Julia and I were sitting in our living room watching Keegan and Emma play. Anna and her husband had just announced they were expecting their second child, and the family couldn't have been happier. The doorbell rang, and I got up to answer it, finding John and Fred standing there with a bottle of wine and a homemade cake. "We thought we'd come over and celebrate," John said with a warm smile. Come in," I replied, stepping aside to let them enter. The house was soon filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses. We toasted to new beginnings, to love, and to the unbreakable bonds of family. As the night drew to a close and everyone began to leave, John pulled me aside. "Jack, I just want to say thank you for everything. For forgiving me, for welcoming me back into your life, and for being such a wonderful father to Anna. John, we've all come a long way, and I'm glad we've reached a place of peace and understanding. You deserve happiness just as much as anyone else." He hugged me tightly, and as we parted, I saw tears of gratitude in his eyes. Julia joined me, wrapping her arms around my waist. "Ready to call it a night?" she asked. "Absolutely," I replied, kissing her forehead. As we walked back into the house, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Despite all the hardships, we had found our way to a place of love and happiness. Our family was whole again, and the future looked bright. Julia and I climbed into bed, and as we drifted off to sleep, I knew that no matter what lay ahead, we would face it together. Our journey was far from over, and I couldn't wait to see where it would take us next. In the end, it wasn't just about finding love again. It was about building a life filled with joy, resilience, and unwavering support. And as I held Julia close, I knew that we had all found our way home.